Hey y'all, it's Ashley at Bookishrealm and I am back with another video. Today I'm here to do my mid-month wrap-up. It has been a crazy reading month already. I have read, I think it's like 23 books at the time of me like filming this video, and I just stopped. Like I was like, no more is going to be on this section because I just can't. So I stopped at 23, and I think I have like a couple more, like I'm on the verge of finishing, that I technically could have included on this, but I was like, no, I'm not going to do it. Like I'm not going to do it. We're just going to go with what I have because it's just going to be a lot. I am really moving through some things. I have a lot of downtime right now because of some things going on. So that's just, once again, like January, it's been my way of coping and my way of dealing with things. So we have quite a few things to talk about. Hopefully this won't be super long. We're gonna go ahead and jump in and get started. I typically do break this up where I do like the books first and then the comics, graphic novels, picture books afterwards, but we're just going to do this one time. We're going to do it in the order that I read it because it just will be easier for me to do it that way this time. Okay, so the first book that I have on this list is Inevitable Conclusions. Not list, but the first book I read in February was Inevitable Conclusions, and this is by Christina C. Jones. This is the first book in the Inevitable series, which, as you all know, I'm trying very hard to make it through Christina C. Jones's backlist. So this first book focuses on two characters, Cora and Tariq, and they are friends. They've been friends for years, and they have made the decision that they are going to be friends with benefits. And the reason why they decide to be friends with benefits and not really take it any further is because they've tried to do that before and it really just hasn't worked. So they kind of just sleep with each other when they're not seeing other people, but they still have this really close relationship, and people really don't function well like being in relationships with them separately because of the fact that they know that these two are really close friends. I think I love the bond that the two of them shared, and they really supported each other no matter what. There is this particular scene that happens towards the end of the novel where there's a reveal about something dark that has happened in the past, and Tariq really stood by Cora and like told his truth, shared her truth, and kind of stood up to her mom, and I really appreciated that. There were also like a lot of different other elements that I really enjoyed about this book. In particular, I really liked the relationship that Cora had with her daughter, and then Tariq had a very great relationship with Cora's daughter as well. And I know that we do end up getting a book in the daughter's perspective, which I think is going to be really interesting. I was also really intrigued by the fact that Cora was in theater, and a lot of this book centers around the company that she has that's based in theater and the success that she's had with it, and her daughter following her footsteps. I just thought that was really unique, and I was really invested in learning about that as much as I was in the romance, which definitely does end up saying a lot. This was just a first great installment to a series. It's CCJ. We don't expect anything less. She's versatile, she's unique, she's just a great writer, and it always translates into all of her books, and it has yet to disappoint me. I ended up giving this one 4.5 stars. The next book that I ended up reading was a book that is super hyped. A lot of people really enjoyed it, and it's one that I didn't enjoy as much as everybody, so unpopular opinion on the way. And this is 7 Days in June by Tia Williams. This is a book that focuses on two characters by the name of Shane and Eva, who meet when they're about 15 years old. They spend about a week together, and then something tragic happens, and they never see each other again until 15 years later, where they're both attending a literature conference, or she was speaking on a panel and he randomly shows up, and that's when they end up reconnecting. Okay, so here's my issue with this book from the jump. I know a lot of people are labeling this book as like a second chance romance, and people are saying that the connection and the romance and the bond that they had when they were teens was really great. I read that whole section, like the flashbacks to their teenage years, I read that completely different than I think other people. Their relationship, in my opinion, was extremely codependent. They spent a lot of time together in those 7 days doing drugs, drinking, and engaging in self-harm. So there's a lot of content warnings there as well. And I don't see anything that's romantic about that. I felt like it was very enabling and it was very codependent. And a lot of that was personally like triggering for me. Like I physically had a reaction to what I was reading, and I don't know if, and not that I don't know, I really do feel like that probably is impacting how I view this novel in its totality, but I just didn't see that relationship as being healthy from the get-go. So nothing about it was romantic for me from the start. When we fast forward 15 years later and they're meeting, I was very nervous because I don't feel like either one of them really went through enough of a healing process, a coping process to engage in a romantic relationship. Yes, it's 15 years later. 15 years doesn't mean anything unless you're actively engaging in a healing process. And I don't feel like that was what was happening, or I felt like they were really, really fragile. Like Shane was just, I felt like at any moment, like he was just going to crack and break because he just wasn't at a point where his healing was solidified. He was just too fragile for me. And so I was so wrapped up in their mental, emotional, and physical stability that their romance really just didn't really mean anything to me. I was so worried about them as humans that the romance element to me was just like, I don't really care about the romance regardless if they have good chemistry. I'm like, what is going to happen that may trigger either one of them to spiral back to where they were? And there were a couple moments where I was really, really nervous for Shane and fearful that he was going to spiral and go completely backwards because he just wasn't in a good place. And another thing that I didn't like is that this whole book is like laced with Black pop culture references. And I don't know whether it was the intent of making sure that people realize that this was like two Black characters and it was a Black love romance, but it just was too much. Like, I felt like it was trying too hard to be Black, which is crazy because I like when there is kind of like this natural flow of Black cultural representation in a book, but it felt forced in this, and it was just like over the top with references, which makes you question like, who was your target audience when you wrote this book? So with that being said, this book barely can be considered a romance, by the way, because that HEA was like, it came in barely at the end, like hanging on, skin and bones, barely hanging on, did that HEA come through in the end. I think that the writing style in here was extremely poetic. It was beautiful. I really did enjoy that. I think that the disability representation was handled very well. I think it was done with care and compassion, and it really gave me as a reader insight to what it can be like to have a chronic illness the way that one of our characters does. And so I appreciated that. I think that Tia Williams is a gifted writer, but this book just wasn't it. Like, all the hype that's behind it, I don't really get it and I don't really understand. And the whole like, oh, this is a second chance romance, I'm like, bruh, like, it was never a romance to begin with. Like, that should have never happened to begin with. I don't know. Yeah, but like I said, I ended up giving this one 3 stars. The next book that I ended up reading was Maisie Chen's Last Chance by Lisa Yee. This is a middle grade story that kind of floats between like historical fiction and realistic fiction. It focuses on Maisie Chen and her mother as they go to Last Chance, Minnesota for the summer. And they go because Maisie's grandfather is falling ill, so they go to help their grandmother with the restaurant. And it is an interesting story because while there is a racially charged incident that happens, and Maisie goes and she talks to her grandfather about it, and in their conversation he decides to tell her a little bit about her family history, and she starts learning about Lucky Chen, who ends up moving from China to California, but when he gets to California, he's accused of stealing from an employer he's going for work. So then he ends up moving from California to Minnesota, where he works at this restaurant, which is kind of their legacy. And it's really interesting because it's a story within a story, and the way that the story is told is like paralleling the discrimination that happened to Lucky Chen and the discrimination that has continued to happen even up until like Maisie's generation. So there were definitely a couple of things that I loved about this story. I think the writing style was really great. It was accessible, and then the way that the historical elements were incorporated were really fun and unique, and I think a lot of kids are going to enjoy the fact that it ends up being like a story within a story. And while like that element of like the history and the discrimination is a huge part of the story. I think I love seeing just other things that Maisie does in the story, just getting to know her grandparents more, her meeting other people like Daisy and old friend that her mom knew from high school, and just her kind of getting used to being somewhere else, because it wasn't necessarily like an easy thing for her to kind of have to pack up and spend her summer in Minnesota in a small town when she wanted to be at home with her friends. But I think she ends up gaining a lot from the story, and it's not a story that's all roses. Like, it doesn't really end on the highest of highs, but I think that it is an impactful story that some people really enjoy in terms of like the historical elements, because there was a lot that I learned, like the whole idea behind like paper suns. I didn't know what that meant until I read this story, and I started doing a little bit of research on my own. So it was interesting learning more about that, and I'm glad that this is kind of a story that does exist for readers to learn more about that information. I ended up giving this one 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I ended up reading was Omar Rising by Said, and this is the same author of Amal Unbound, which I read in 2020, and this technically is a companion novel to that. So I was excited when I saw this was coming out, and I was able to get an advanced reader copy of it. And it follows, as the title says, a young boy by the name of Omar. He gets into a prestigious boys' school, and his entire community is really looking forward to him going to the school. It's a great opportunity, and they are thinking that this will be a pathway for him to make a better life for himself and his family. So he ends up going to the school, and it's really, really nice. It has all these like nice amenities, things that he's not really used to seeing. And then things quickly change when he realizes that scholarship kids, because he gets a scholarship to attend, are treated differently than the other students, and not just in like a casual way, but like in a serious way, where he's required to take certain classes. He's held to a different academic standard, and he's told that he has to do service hours, which is basically like maintaining the entire property. They have these kids do this in order to have service hours, but he figures out eventually that it's a weeding process, because it becomes so strenuous to like have to do your service hours, take these hard courses, and then your other courses, then just trying to find that balance. It becomes too much for a lot of the scholarship kids, so they end up weeding them out. And when he finds that out, he's like, that's not fair. It's not right that we're held to a different academic standard than everybody else. So he decides to kind of push back against the system. So basically the same way that I felt when I read Amal is the same way that I felt about Omar in the story. Like, he is super courageous. It's not easy when you have to pack up and leave everything that you know and travel to a new area only to be treated differently because of your class. There's a lot of classism that is apparent within the context of this book, but I really admire his courage to push back and say that, you know, scholarship kids deserve a fair chance just like everybody else. We should be able to enjoy our time at school just like everybody else. And I think that Said definitely does a great job in setting up a great support system. We do get to see some appearances from Amal, which is nice, and the encouragement that she gives him. And I think that with that and the writing style that's really accessible, it just makes for a really interesting and fun book that I don't think a lot of readers should really miss out on. You don't have to read Amal Unbound in order to read this book, but it will be interesting if you read that one first and then read the second one and see kind of the connections between the two. The next book that I ended up reading was I think this is more of a children's and a middle grade book, and it's What Lane by Tori Maldonado, and this one focuses on a young biracial boy by the name of Steven, who is coming into this like awareness that he is different from like his white friends, or society views him as being different than his white friends. Like, he knows that he is different from his white friends, but the way that society treats him, he's just now picking up on it. And it starts kind of small, where he would go out with his friend Dan, and his friend Dan would do certain things, and he would do the same thing as his friend Dan, but he would get reprimanded and then Dan wouldn't. And then it started getting bigger when Dan's cousin Chad kind of comes into the picture, and then he just openly is just awful to Steven. And I think that at that point his father just kind of steps in and is like, okay, we need to have this conversation about the fact that even though you're biracial, you know, the world is still gonna see you as a black boy, a black man. So his father is black and his mother is white. I think that Maldonado does a great job in terms of addressing the complexity of being biracial in America, but I don't like the characterization that he did with the parents at all. It just was really, really weird. So you have Steven's father, who's black, clearly, and he is telling him that, you know, the world is going to see you as a black boy. I don't care if you're biracial. To the rest of the world, you're going to be black. And his mother is very set on him saying, like, you know, or being like, you know, you're biracial, like that's who you are. And I get it, because I think she wanted her son to be secure in his identity, but it's almost like she didn't want to acknowledge the fact that there was potential for society to see her son as being black and not biracial. And it also sent kind of some mixed messages, because it's like, okay, your husband is saying that your son is a black kid, you're saying that your son is biracial, and it's like, okay, what narrative are you trying to come up with here? Because the parents are not even on the same page. And then there's an incident at the end of the book where Stephen ends up getting hurt, and it's pretty severe, because there is a section where someone says, like, had either the object, either his head or the object had been like a little bit more left or a little bit more right, like he could have lost an eye. And he lies to his parents about it. And I didn't like this, and I've seen a couple other reviewers too who've picked up on this. It's like, I didn't really like that, because it was kind of like we go through all these conversations for him to lie about this incident, which was coded as being racially charged in terms of motive. And he lies to his parents, and this would have been an even bigger point for them to sit down and have conversations about stuff like this, but it kind of ruined that. I mean, it was just really, really strange with his parents. Also, his parents was just really, really strange. I think that this is still an accessible book. It's an easy read. It's a quick read. It didn't take me long to read at all. I think the audiobook is only a couple of hours. I think it still is a great starting point for those who are starting to have those conversations with their kids about race. But I think that the older the kids are, this may not be as good of a fit. I don't know. I definitely did struggle with rating this one. I did end up giving it 3 stars, but I struggled with it because there were a couple of things that were done, like I said, that I didn't necessarily agree with. The next book that I ended up reading was Big Apple Diaries by Alyssa Bermudez. This is a middle grade graphic novel that focuses on Alyssa's time growing up in New York City, and it is a book that really just captures a lot of things that middle graders are gonna really like love. It's a lot of talks about like friendship and dating for the first time and going through puberty and dealing with parents. But what makes this one so unique is that it does take place during 2000 and 2001. So the author does capture some of her experience during 9/11, and as an adult that remembers 9/11 like it happened yesterday, I can tell you exactly where I was, what I was doing, what my reaction was. It was interesting reading back through her journal entries and seeing exactly what she had gone through. I do wish that there was a little bit more kind of like exploration of like the change in politics, the rise of Islamophobia, but of course I think at that age she probably was not as in tune with it as she would be now as an adult. I really like that this was done in hues of blue, or in shades of blue. I was very surprised that it was done in all blue, because with the cover I was like, oh yeah, this is going to be super colorful, and it's all in all blue. But it really does work, and it kind of moves back and forth between like traditional panel work, and then there are sections where we see kind of almost, it looks like journal entries, kind of in the like the vein of Diary of a Wimpy Kid. So I think that kids would definitely enjoy that element. This does not solely focus on 9/11. It takes about 200 pages before you even get to see 9/11, and then you learn exactly like what she was doing on that day, how she ends up coping, and what the city was like after the events of 9/11. She does include pictures and stuff like after the fact, like her actual real life pictures and stuff, and talks about how some names were changed for the sake of privacy and things. But overall, like, I really did enjoy this. This was definitely a good read. I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. So the next book that I ended up reading was Powwow Day, and this is a picture book that focuses on 8-year-old River, who wants to go to Powwow Day and wants to participate but can't because she's healing from a sickness, which The sickness is never disclosed, so we don't really know like what the sickness is. But while she's there, like she attempts to participate and she just can't. She's just too weak to do so. So we get to see the powwow through the lens like of her perspective, which is really unique, and we get to see her friends and family like dance for her healing. And it was just really cool, like the vibrant colors and everything. It's just one of those books that we always talk about, the whole concept of Dr. Bishop's like windows, mirrors, sliding glass doors, where kids get the opportunity to step into someone else's culture and traditions. And this is one of those books. And in the back it includes like a lot of information about just like the technicalities that go into a powwow and the appropriate etiquette to have at a powwow. I just love the art. The art was just really, really beautiful. The coloring was really, really beautiful as well. So if you're looking for a new picture book to check out, I would recommend Powwow Day, and I ended up giving this one 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I ended up reading is easily going to be one of my favorite reads of 2022, and that is I Must Betray You by Rita Sepetys. This is a YA historical fiction, and it's set against the background or backdrop of a communist Romania. So basically we see Romania where it's at a point where it just is horrible. People can't get electricity, people can't get access to food, and they have no outside connections to the global community. They're extremely isolated, and it's a lot of like human atrocities that are occurring, and no one is really bearing witness to it when I say like from a global perspective, because everything is being hidden. So the story itself follows a character by the name of Christian. He's turned into an informer because he's caught with illegal currency. I think it's a dollar bill that he's caught with, and so they force him to become an informer, and we follow him day to day as he navigates trying to not only live in this communist society that has basically just turned everyone against everyone, but also he himself has now become an informer. So really already like right there an intriguing premise. So the story itself is actually told in small chapters. The book itself ends up being something like 90 something chapters, and it's done that way I think because it makes the book more digestible. It's definitely not an easy read. I mean, this is 1989 and it is definitely not that far removed, so I think a lot of people are going to have trouble like making it through some elements of it, because it's like, dang, this wasn't even 40 years ago, and it's really close to us when we think about it in terms of history. And of course a great portion of this book also covers the Romanian Revolution in 89. So it's just unfortunate because you learn through an author's note that yes, there was the Romanian Revolution, however, like it's sad to say, and I can't grasp the fact that they were able to get rid of the dictator and his wife. They were assassinated on Christmas Day by, I think by what's it called when they have them stand in front of a wall. Somebody get me with that, because I can't remember what I want to say, but they were both shot on December 25th, so Christmas Day 1989. But you learn in the afterword by the author, by Sepetys, that it doesn't really change anything. It went from one huge communist regime to like a smaller one. So it was still like a group of people who were trying to exert their control and keep these people oppressed. So it was like, you don't want to feel like it was a revolution and nothing changed, but a lot really didn't end up changing, and there still is a lot of issues in Romania today. But I think that it really made me think about some things that I think I take for granted, that yes, I pay bills, but I not only can afford to pay a bill, but I have access to have electricity like turned on. I can go to a grocery store, and that doesn't mean I'm always able to buy much, but I don't have to wait in a line to go get food. I mean, this was 1989. And waiting in line to get a food, not having access, like having to light candles at night because your government won't allow you to have access to electricity because of fear of whatever it may be, whether fear of outside communication with any other country outside of the people who were there. And then that fear of like not being able to trust anyone. I understand like it's human nature like not to trust people, but in this sense, you literally could not even trust your own family and friends and teachers and classmates and lovers. Like no one could be trusted because anybody could have been turned into an informer, and people were willing to do anything if it meant keeping themselves. themselves safe. It was a means of survival at that point. So it definitely is a tough read, and it's interesting because there are these sections in the book that are kind of like informal reports, and somebody is informing, like somebody is giving information that is kind of documented in these reports, and it's not Christian because it's about Christian. So somebody is informing on Christian and he doesn't know it, and when that twist comes and you figure out like who has been informing the entire time that this book has been going on, it's absolutely mind-boggling. It's so crazy. I think one of my favorite things about Sepetys is that she has such lyrical writing and she's able to connect you with her characters. Like, I would have never thought in a million years that I would connect to Christian as a character. I mean, our experiences in life are so vastly different, but she just wrote him in a way that I just felt for him. I felt everything for him because it's this young boy who's trying to survive and has no way to really survive, and he's forced to do something that he really just doesn't want to do, and he's seen things that no teenager should ever have to see. So of course I ended up giving this one 5 stars. Really loved it, really enjoyed it. If you haven't read Arita Sepetys book, I definitely need you to read something by her because she always writes YA historical fiction from a perspective of like lesser known historical events, and it is something that I really appreciate her doing because she puts her research and her work into these books. So the next thing that I ended up reading was a comic series, and this is Home Volume 1, and this is by Julio Anta, and it's really interesting because it's like commentary on immigration, but it's also kind of like what if immigrants had like X-Men powers. Like, a really interesting premise there, and it's about this young boy and his mother who end up leaving Guatemala trying to come to the United States, and they're seeking asylum, and what ends up happening is in their travels they don't realize that the presidency has switched, presumably, like the way that the story is told, presumably it's to Trump. So the policies about immigration has changed, and of course when they get there they are separated and he is sent somewhere else. They're kept in these cold cages, and eventually like he does end up making it to his aunt's house. And I thought the story was good, but it just ends up being like super anticlimactic, if that makes sense. It just didn't flow the way I think they were anticipating it flowing, and it didn't work that well. And then it ends on a cliffhanger, which is confusing because from my perspective I thought this was a complete series because I have not seen any other issues like discussed on Image at all, so I'm pretty sure that it's done, but it just didn't make any sense the way that it ended. I thought that the artwork was just okay, and it had some cool elements, but it didn't deliver, and it didn't execute the way that I thought it was going to execute. But I definitely say, like, if you're interested, definitely still like give it a read. The next book that I ended up reading was my first Paula Chase book, which is so sad. I can't believe I haven't read Paula Chase until now, but it was my first Paula Chase book, and I ended up giving this one 4 stars. It was So Done, which is the first book in the So Done companion like trilogy series, and this one focuses on 2 characters, Tay and Mila. And Mila is on her way back, or she's coming back from the summer that she spent at her aunt's house in the suburbs, and when she gets back things kind of get weird between her and Tay because Tay feels like she has been removed from their low-income housing project, and she feels like because she's been in the burbs, like she feels like she's too good for their community now, and she feels like she doesn't want to invest any time in their friendship, but instead just wants to focus on this dance audition for this new kind of like a program that's coming to the community. And what Tay doesn't realize is that Mila is holding on to a secret that has potential to kind of like destroy their friendship. I think one thing that I really loved about this book is that it's unapologetically Black. Like, I think there are a lot of universal themes that a lot of readers are going to relate to, but the sequencing of the events and like a lot of how it's told, I could tell that Chase had Black kids in mind when she wrote it, and I really appreciated that. And just like the way that she captured the perspective of Pirates Cove, which is the low-income housing community that it takes place in, she really captures the good, bad, and the ugly in it, and it gives such a vibrant and interesting perspective of the community at large. I also struggled a lot, not gonna lie with you, I struggled a lot with Tay as a character. She's very frustrating, but I think that when I think about how I was at her age, I completely get how she feels, because she really is trying to keep things the same, and Mila is not trying to keep things the same, and she just can't understand why their friendship is not the way that it used to be, and she just doesn't realize that it's a traumatic experience that is keeping Mila from really engaging with her the way that she used to. I think Chase is known, or has a reputation for really touching on taboo topics that are often not seen in middle grade books, and I'm glad that she does, because these are things that like middle grade kids, like that age group, they go through, and it's good to see that kind of stuff on page. I think she does this particularly too, like with family dynamics, like Mila's being raised by a single father and Tay is being raised by her grandmother. Her father is kind of in and out, like he's on page and he plays a role in the book, but he's in and out and not really a stable father figure because he's battling drug addiction, and she doesn't shy away from putting that on page at all. And while there are like these heavy elements of the book, I like that she does balance it out with the arts program that's come to the community. Like all the kids are applying to, like, you know, either do ballet like and dance, or they want to do theater or drama or whatever, and it's nice seeing like how all the kids are super invested in being in this program. And it's a good segue, because the way that I read it, I think it's a perfect setup for the second book that we're going to see, which is Doughboys. And we see two of our male characters from this first book and this second book, and that whole entire program situation is really the catalyst for, I think, what we're going to see in the second book. So I liked it. I can't believe, like I said, I can't believe this is my first Ball and Chase book, but I really enjoyed it. And like I said, I ended up giving this first book 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I ended up reading was a manga, and it's Blood on the Tracks. And I really can't say much about this, because this is one of those manga series that you have to walk into and be completely and totally blind. It does focus on some interesting family dynamics between a mother and her son. She's a tad bit overprotective, and there's some wild stuff that ends by the time you get to this manga. And psychologically, I don't know where it's going to go, but I was so happy because I did have volumes 2 and 3 checked out from the library already. So whenever I get the chance within the next few days, I probably will sit down and read those next volumes, because this was absolutely crazy. If you're interested in manga and you haven't read Blood on the Tracks, highly recommend it. If you like thriller, horror type stuff, it was intriguing. 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I have is Stiff, which is the first book in the Heavy on the D series by Stephanie Nicole Norris. This is one that I randomly decided to pick up, and I really enjoyed it. It was a 4-star read for me. It focuses on a character by the name of Asia, and this is interesting because I can't really tell you much about this book without spoiling it. So the best way I can put it is that Asia, at the beckoning of her friends, ends up going to this club called The Den, which is strip club, sex type of club thing where you can really engage with male escorts, and they are all about prioritizing the safety of the women that attend. And she goes there and she ends up, you know, checking in at the front and everything. They tell her, okay, you know, like, we're gonna set you up with a bodyguard or whatever. And she has her bodyguard, and she goes into one of the rooms and she engages with one of the dancers, but she doesn't want things to like go any further than that. And then she has the option of like if she wants to sleep with someone. And so her bodyguard's name is Kane, and he is an option on like this tablet where they can choose like who they want to sleep with and what things they want done. And she chooses him, and it goes from there. And that's all that I can tell you about it, except like there's a lot of great like romantic chemistry, physical chemistry, mental chemistry, emotional chemistry. Like, it was just a good book. Okay, like basically that's all I can tell you. I can't really say anything else, but I will be continuing with the rest of the series, and it's one that you definitely should check out if you're interested in romance. The next book that I have is another romance book, and it is Chasing After Love by Suzette Riddick. This is the first book in the Carnival Chronicles, which is a series of like 13 books that are all connected by this Carnival festival that takes place in Chicago. So this first one I ended up giving a 3.5 stars, and it focuses on our two characters by the name of Nancy and Gabe. Sorry, I had their names written down because y'all know that I am awful when it comes to names, but it focuses on two characters by the name of Nancy and Gabe, and both of them have had like some really rough patches when it comes to romance, and this is kind of a, I don't even want to say what trope it is because I feel like that's a spoiler, but this is an opportunity for them to kind of kindle a romance with each other, and it of course is blocked by some people who kind of get in the way. There was just like one situation that happened that I think Nancy kind of like took too hard, and I don't think she needed to take it that hard because it was clear that it was a mistake, and I really don't even feel like he needed to do groveling because I feel like it was just kind of clear that it was not what the situation was. I also just felt like she just ran away a little too easily. Like Nancy just frustrated me just a tad bit, but I did enjoy it. I thought it was really, really interesting writing style. This is, like I said, this is my first time reading from this author, and I definitely want to check out more of her backlist. I think that I wish there was more like exploration of the carnival in it. It really was just a connecting factor between Nancy and Gabe, and I wanted just like more of it. I'm currently reading the second one, and I think that we may get a little bit more. Not sure yet, but they may all end up just being books where our hero and heroines are just connected because the carnival is taking place, and that's where they all generally seem to meet. The next book that I ended up reading was Recognize, an anthology honoring and amplifying Black life. This was edited by Wade Hudson and Cheryl Hudson. Unfortunately, Cheryl Hudson has now passed away. They are a dynamic duo when we talk about books for Black children in literature, and they decided to come up with this anthology that featured like 30 different authors that basically each came up with a story that they felt like amplified the importance of Black life. I always have kind of like a difficult time rating anthologies because the stories are generally like so varied, and it's kind of hard to come up with a rating for just an entire collection. This one wasn't as hard. I did end up giving it 4 stars. I love the mix of new and old school authors. So you had authors like Sharon Draper, Nikki Grimes, Carol Weatherford, and then you had like newer school authors like E.B. Zaboy, you had Mahogany Ella Brown. So it was just a nice mixture, and what was so interesting is that like every author understood what the assignment was, but they conveyed it in different ways, and I really appreciated that. I know from the cover it seems like everything in this book is probably super dark, and there are some darker elements in it because it is talking about things that Black people have experienced and continue to experience, but joy is represented. There are elements where there are positive affirmations for Black girls and Black boys, and I just really enjoyed a lot of different elements. I think my favorite 3 stories were written by Kwame Mbalie, E.B. Zaboy, and Carol Weatherford. I think just the way that they put the thought and creativity in their story, it just really resonated with me, and those 3 stories stuck out to me. There was a lot of good stuff, especially the fact that they were full color printouts of artwork that a lot of creators had did specifically for this book, and it was just nice. This is a really accessible read. It took me like a day to finish. I think I finished it in one sitting. I actually ended up I was reading this book for work actually, and I was like, oh shoot, I have to do something with this book by tomorrow, and I haven't started it yet. So I finished it in a day, and you really can finish it in one sitting. Like I didn't rush it or anything. It just is the way it flows. It's easy to finish it. The next book that I ended up reading is another picture book, and it's Dear Reader, A Love Letter to Libraries. I ended up giving this one 5 stars. It is about a young girl who loves to read. She goes to the library and she keeps reading and reading and reading and reading, and she's reading all of these books, and she just doesn't see characters that look like her, or all the books in which she sees characters that look like her are all based on the most painful parts of her history. So of course this is a conversation about that balancing of Black joy and Black pain, and how important it is to have that balance. And I know that I have been very much so guilty of really showcasing those hard-hitting contemporary realistic fiction books that are trauma-based stories, and not really highlighting those books that are about Black joy. I know that I'm super guilty of that. That has just been my Achilles heel, because I really do enjoy hard-hitting contemporaries, but I think that for, you know, when you read one of those, you've got to match it. There's got to be some type of balance, and that's exactly what is happening in this picture book. It talks about that balance, and I really appreciated that this was brought down to a picture book like level, where it's like, this is a conversation that needs to be happening in publishing. It needs to be stated straightforward. It needs to be in a picture book for people to see and understand why this balance needs to exist. I thought it was great. The illustrations were beautiful and vibrant and just super colorful. I loved it. 5 stars. If you haven't read Dear Reader, I highly recommend it. The next book that I ended up reading was the 3rd book in the Heart of a Valentine series, and it's Give Me a Reason, and it's in the Heart of a Valentine series, sorry. This 3rd book is Give Me a Reason, and this is Allison and Lance's story. So when you step into this book, it's interesting because every predecessor sets up the book that comes after it. So our 2nd book in the series has already set up the relationship between Allison and Lance, and they've been seeing each other for a while. And the way that this book starts is that they're at the wedding reception, I believe, of our characters in the 1st book. Allison ends up passing out, and she never tells Lance that she has a disability. She never says anything about it, and she tries to hide it from him because she thinks that once he finds out, he's not going to want to deal with her. When she passes out, he eventually figures out what exactly is going on with her, and he's just like, no, that wouldn't stop me from wanting to be with you whatsoever. I don't know why you would think that. So they continue on their relationship, and everything is good. And then we have some very awkward things that begin to happen. So Lance's father basically starts asking Allison some questions about her fertility, which A, you should never ask a woman any of those questions to begin with. B, I think it's very awkward to even feel comfortable asking those questions to a woman who hasn't been dating your son for that long. This eventually spirals into Allison having this fear of not being able to have children, which I get but also don't get, because she never sees a doctor and she never makes an effort to go see a doctor to possibly talk about her fertility and how her disability may or may not impact her fertility. So it's just like, okay, so if we're nervous, we should probably go talk to a doctor, see what a doctor says, and then go from there. But then we just are not going to talk to doctors. So then she rejects Lance on the basis of that, but it's not any concrete. It was just like so many elements were inserted into this one where it was like it didn't make any sense. It was used as a plot device, and none of it really added up when you really sat down and you thought about it. I love Lance as a character though. He was very supportive. He stood by Allison through everything. He really cared about her, and he was just awesome. But it was just too many side things going on with the plot that I just really didn't like and didn't enjoy, which is why I only gave it 3 stars, and this is like my least favorite one in the series so far. The next one that I ended up reading was Operation Sisterhood, and this is a cute middle grade story that focuses on a main character by the name of Bo, who is with her mom, you know, her single mom, and her mom is dating this guy by the name of Bill, and she doesn't really have a problem with her mom dating this guy, and they're cool until all of a sudden they decide that they're going to move to Harlem with Bill. And it's, you know, like, all right, we're moving to Harlem, you're picking me up, you're moving me there. Not only are we moving in with Bill, we're moving in with Bill's daughter, and then Bill lives in a shared house with 2 other adults, and then they're twins. So it's a huge adjustment change for Bo, which I completely understand, and I'm an adult. So there were a lot of things that I adored about this book. I think the character development was done very, very well by the author. We really get to know the personalities of Lily, Lee, and Sunday, and the 3 of them really try to make Bo feel comfortable because they know that she's walking into a situation that she's not as familiar with. They really admire her. She's the oldest. They think she's good with kids. They think she's really organized. And I like the relationship that Bo ends up building with the twins, but I was more invested in the relationship that she ended up building with Sunday, because Sunday was really about to become her sister, and I think there was more kind of at risk. I don't want to say at risk there. I think that there was just more, it was more there than with the twins, because they weren't, I don't know. I just didn't feel as invested. I'm trying to figure out how to word this. I think the stakes were different. That's what I'm looking for. I think the stakes were higher with Sunday than they were with the twins. So I was really interested in watching that relationship evolve. And, you know, the story itself really is about Bo's adjustment to this new living situation and her mom being married and going from being in school to being homeschooled, which a girl's called free schooling. It is about her adjustment, but there's so many like good tidbits of information sprinkled in about the history of Harlem and like all the different cultures of people that live in the city, and the girls are discovering it, so we're seeing it through their lens, and Bo is learning more about it. And I absolutely love that element of the book. I think one of the things I did struggle with this book is that there's a lot that happens in this book in like a short period of time. So you have like Bo moving, and then there's some financial issues with the parents, and then Bill runs a bookstore, but the bookstore's not doing well, so then the girls come up with a plan to help save the bookstore. Then there's like this element with the community garden that all the parents help with, and then there's like a plot line that deals with like some neighborhood kids. Like it was a lot, and sometimes it was difficult to keep up with because every plot line introduced like new characters, so then you had to keep up with those characters. So for the sake of like the length of the book, I think it was just too much that was going on. But overall, like I thought it was a solid story. Like it definitely is about this patchwork family and how they make things work, you know, living together, and you know, even with like all these pets that they have and stuff like that. It was really unique and really interesting. This is my first book by this author, and I'm looking forward to checking out more by her, and I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I ended up reading was a picture book, and this is the Leaping Ladoo. I believe that's how you say it, Ladoo. There was a pronunciation guide, and I hope I'm saying that right. This is like a classic twist on the gingerbread man, and literally that's what it is. It's just a classic twist on the gingerbread man, but it is taking place, of course, in India. So as we are following the Ladoo through like India, we're getting to see so many different things in terms of culture, like food, dress, language. It's one of those books, again, like I just talked about with the Powwow Day book, that it is the epitome of that windows, mirrors, and doors, where we're getting the opportunity, or kids and even adults are getting the opportunity to kind of step into someone else's culture without having to leave your own space or your home. And the illustrations were just beautiful, y'all. They were really, really beautiful. It captured it so beautiful, and it was funny, and it with a surprising end. It was just good. I really liked it. It made me feel really, really lighthearted and happy, and I love picture books that do that. And I ended up giving this one 4 out of 5 stars. Okay, y'all, so this is gonna be like on my most disappointing and least favorite books of 2022. I was very, very upset about this book. That is Way of the Househusband, volume number 5. I was already on the fence about the series, okay? And it's because it's told kind of like in vignette style, where there's no central plot line. It's just kind of like these short stories that are funny, and some of the stories in this one were funny. Like I enjoyed the story where like they all go to the sake like tasting party and they all get wasted. There was one where our main character's wife's like family comes and they try to cook and they're destroying the kitchen. It was funny. But then there was the rap battle scene, and it just didn't sit well with me. I don't know if it was like a translation issue. I don't know like what happened, but it was just like the use of AAVE just did not sit well with me. And I know a lot of people did not pick up on it. And a lot of people are not going to pick up on it because I think that the use of AAVE has turned into an appropriation normality, which I don't really care for. I've talked about that a lot because a lot of people don't know the history behind it. I know that there are exchanges that happen in language all the time, and it's going to happen, but when people refer to AAVE as Gen Z language, like that's how I know you don't know the history of it at all. So to see that and then see the characters kind of dressed stereotypically, it says a lot about the global perception of Black American culture, more specifically hip hop culture. And I just didn't vibe with it. It just didn't sit well with me. I don't know why, if we were going to use slang, English slang, why it had to be AAVE and why we had to dress the characters as such. It just was not my cup of tea. I ended up giving it 2.5 stars. I already was sitting on the fence about the series, and that was probably enough to make me not read the rest of it. So with that being said, I may just be moving on from that. That really was just Black History Month. Did not want to read that. The next book that I ended up finishing was a middle grade fantasy book, and this is A Comb of Wishes by Lisa Stringfellow. This is a book that is oh my gosh, it's so good. I don't even know where to start. Okay, so one of the first things that I did notice about this book is that it focuses on the oral traditions of, or the oral tradition of storytelling. So there are parts of the book that say like crick, crack, this is a story, which is a tradition that is often found in Caribbean storytelling. And I thought that that was really unique. So the whole entire framework of this book is about storytelling, and I really like that. But at its core, it focuses on a girl by the name of Keela, who lives on the island with her father, and she's grieving the recent loss of her mother. One day she's on the beach and she finds this box that has a comb in it, and there's a mermaid that meets her that says that, you know, if you give me the comb back, I will grant you one wish. And she doesn't realize that, you know, making a wish like that, making a deal like that has its consequences. And it's really, really intriguing. It's told in dual POV, so we get a perspective from Keela, we get a perspective from the mermaid Ophida, who is like dark and sinister to some degree, but there's a reason behind that. And the two characters, Keela and Ophida, end up having more in common than what you think, especially when we think about like grief. I think one of my favorite aspects of this book was how it dives into like what the meaning behind grief is and how we all process grief differently. And I think that it's interesting because we watch Keela kind of do what she thinks is going to help her process her grief, when there are other things that actually need to happen, and they do naturally happen eventually, but she kind of pushes back against them. But to help her with that, Stringfellow definitely does provide her with a great support system with great side characters, and they help her kind of work through those problems and those issues. This is a great introduction to Caribbean folklore. It definitely is a little bit on the darker side, and I would even say that like it doesn't have a perfect conclusion, but it has a conclusion that is necessary for all individuals involved. And I ended up giving this one 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I ended up reading was the start to the connected story. So I talked a little bit about In the Heart of a Valentine, like that series. Well, I read the first book in the connecting series to that series, which is the Falling for a Rose series, and the first book in that series is Safe With Me, and of course this is by Stephanie Nicole Norris. So I read 3 books by her so far this month. This one focuses on the relationship between Samaya and Jonas, and the two start off a relationship where they're friends with benefits, because Samaya is coming off of a divorce and Jonas he struggles with building relationships with women. He's an ex-boxer. He feels like a lot of women just kind of use him for his money, so he has a difficult time trusting women. And the two eventually come to that realization that they want to be more than friends. But there are a couple of things that happen in the context of this book where Jonas makes some mistakes that are stupid mistakes that should have been more like common sense, especially in reference to someone that he's known for an extended period of time. And for me as a reader, I just feel like there's no way he could have picked up on certain things, or he could have not picked up on certain things, and it was almost like he didn't, which makes him extremely naive. He ends up pissing someone off, who then goes to someone else who's pissed off at him, and it puts Samaya in a very compromising position, and she's forced to forgive him super quick. And I was pissed about that because he needed to do more groveling, and he didn't do more groveling because of the way like everything worked out, and it just really, really aggravated me. So that's where we were with that one. Overall though, I thought the chemistry was great. The sex scenes were bomb. It was amazing. I really enjoyed those moments, but I ended up giving it 3.5 out of 5 stars. The next book that I ended up reading was a middle grade horror book, and that is The Keeper by Guadalupe Garcia Macal, and I ended up giving this one 4.5 stars. It is a book that is actually based off of the case called the Westfield Watcher, which has not been solved. If you're interested in that, I would recommend looking it up because it is loosely based on that. Sorry for the birds. It is early in the morning. Enjoy the ambiance. We only have one more book to do after this one. So basically what ends up happening is that the story itself focuses on a pair of siblings, and their names are James and Ava, and they're moving from their home in Texas to this small town in Oregon, and they're not really excited about the move. I mean, we're talking like a middle grade audience here, so nobody in their right mind is going to be super excited about moving to a new town where they don't know anybody. And things are like, when they get to meet some of the kids and stuff, things go okay, and they end up finding some semblance of like balance at first. and then things just go kind of like haywire. So what's interesting and what's important about this is that there's nothing that's wasted in this book in terms of like characters introduced, words on page, everything matters. There is an interesting setup where James and Ava really like playing pranks on each other. They're those type of siblings where they bicker, they fight. They do get along to a certain degree, but they love playing pranks, and it irritates their parents. And I'm like, okay, so why is this important to the story? So basically, James ends up starting to get these letters, and they're really sinister letters. And the letters are detailing like why he doesn't belong in the community and all types of stuff. And at first he thinks it's Ava playing a prank, and Ava's like, no, seriously, honestly, it really isn't me. So they tell their parents, and their parents are like, we're tired of y'all's nonsense. This is like you crying wolf. We can't listen to you. And then it's like, okay, so they're pretty much on their own, which is an interesting setup in itself. The character development is fascinating. I love that we got to see a lot of Mexican American traditions, and James and Ava were really proud of where they came from and their heritage and their culture, and they share that with the kids freely. I think that there were a lot of references to their grandmother, which she plays an important role in the context of the story, even though she's not living at the time that the story takes place. It just was beautifully crafted, and it was spooky, because when you figure out like how everything is connected together, it is so weird and so strange. And I was like, this book is so creepy, and these kids are literally on their own because of stupid pranks, but it works out well. I really, like I said, I really enjoyed it. If you're into middle grade horror, this is definitely one that I would not like, I wouldn't miss this one. And the last book that I read so far this month is Mr. Librarian by Beloved. This was such a great book. I absolutely adored it. It focuses on a couple by the name of Khalil and Honey. Khalil is a Black librarian, and Honey is she does book restoration, and the two meet because she ends up doing book restoration for this guy, and he gets really upset, and it takes place at Khalil's library, and she is supposed to get money. He didn't want to pay her, and Khalil was like, oh no, you're about to pay her. And so basically after that exchange, they couldn't stop thinking about each other, and they end up, meeting up again thanks to Khalil. They do end up meeting again. But what I liked is just like their relationship dynamic was really great. I think that the two of them really did help each other, because they come from pretty dark past, and dark past meaning like family things and relationship things that happen, and they encourage each other to heal. And I think that I really appreciated this on Khalil's end, because Honey really needed to take things slow because of something that happened to her, and he really was all about moving at her pace, even though that was not something that he typically did with women. He was willing to do it for her, and I really love that. And the reasoning like behind his becoming a librarian is the craziest thing that I've ever seen. Like, I never expected that element to be part of the story, and it was really cool, and I loved it. And I was like, oh, this is cool. I would love for Beloved to explore this more in the future, and I want my own Mr. Librarian. And ended up giving this one 4.5 stars. It was really great. All right, y'all, so that is it. I'm sorry that this last part included so many birds, but it is early in the morning, so not surprised about that. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more content from me, click subscribe and hit the bell for notification. Let me know what you've read so far this month in February. Tell me what has been your favorite book, what has been your least favorite book, and I am interested in seeing what's going to happen with my final wrap-up, like what I have read from my final wrap-up. As always, y'all, I'll be back with another video soon.